Jimmy Fallon in tears when Meryl Streep suddenly falls silent after seeing this old photo that night on the Tonight Show stage. Meryl Streep stopped speaking the moment the photograph appeared. Not at the end of a sentence. Not after a pause. Mid-thought, her own thought. And then the assistant placed the photograph on the desk, and Meryl looked at it and did not say another word. Her hand moved toward it the way a hand moves toward something it is not entirely sure is real. Jimmy Fallon watched her face. He watched the studio. He watched 300 people go completely silent before any of them understood why. It was a Monday evening in September 2024. The segment producer later said she had worked in television for 23 years and had never felt a room change the way that room changed the moment Meryl Streep saw that photograph. The control room still talks about it. Meryl Streep had come to talk about her new project, something she had wanted to do for a long time. She had arrived in a dark wine-colored dress and the composure of a woman who has spent 50 years learning that composure is a choice. The audience had traveled from Vermont, from Maryland, from as far as Michigan. They were there for the version of Meryl Streep they already knew, the intelligence, the warmth, the humor that catches people off guard because they expect gravity and get instead a woman who laughs easily and often. The interview had been going beautifully. Jimmy was at his warmest. Meryl was at her most open. Everything was right. Everything was flowing. Then the photograph arrived, not framed, not presented, just placed. A small photograph in a plain envelope, the kind of photograph that has been carried for a long time and shows it. Edges soft, surface faintly matte, where decades of handling have worn the finish down. Not a professional photograph. Not staged. Just a moment. Captured by an ordinary camera. In an ordinary place, a very long time ago. Meryl Streep looked at it. Her hand rose slowly and pressed flat against her sternum, the way a hand moves when something hits a place words haven't reached yet. Her chin dipped. Her eyes, which had been bright and direct all evening, went somewhere else entirely. Back. Far back, into a distance that had nothing to do with the studio or the cameras. Her lips pressed together. She did not cry. She was very still in the way a person is still when they are holding something enormous, very carefully. The entire studio froze. The band stopped without a cue. Questlove stood up slowly from behind his drum kit and did not sit back down. The director did not cut to commercial. The cameraman closest to the stage stayed exactly where he was, holding his frame on her face with the stillness of someone who understands that what he is looking at should not be interrupted. A woman in the fifth row pressed both hands over her mouth. Then the whole room held itself in a silence that had weight and temperature. Jimmy Fallon looked at the photograph. He looked at Meryl. He said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, very quietly, Meryl Streep said a name. Barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by her microphone. Frances. 300 people held their breath. Jimmy Fallon did not move from his chair. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1966. Meryl Streep wasn't always Meryl Streep, icon and legend. In the spring of 1966, she was 16 years old and living in Bernardsville, New Jersey. Smart, noticed, the kind of girl teachers remembered, but without yet the container for whatever lived inside her, restless and unformed. The shape it found was theater. The Bernardsville Community Theater ran a junior summer program every June. The woman who ran it was named Frances Dowd, 51 years old, a former actress who had worked in regional theater through the late 1940s and come to Bernardsville when she married. She had been running the program for 11 years. She was not famous. She simply showed up every June in the converted barn behind the church on Somerville Road. And she worked. Frances Dowd had a rare quality. She did not direct young performers toward the emotion she wanted. She waited for the emotion already there and showed them how to trust it. Most students learn technique. A few learned something harder. That the thing inside them that felt too large to explain was not a problem to be managed, but a resource to be used. Meryl was one of the few. She arrived in the summer of 1966 expecting 6 weeks of polite community theater and left with something she would spend the rest of her career trying to articulate. Frances cast her in a small role, deliberately small, because she needed to learn the difference between performing and being before she was given anything large enough to hide inside. She pulled Meryl aside after the second rehearsal. "You are playing at feeling it," Frances told her. "Stop, just feel it. The camera, the audience, they will always know the difference." Meryl looked at her. "What if I feel it, and it's wrong?" "There is no wrong," Frances said. "There is only true and not true. You are almost always true. You just keep stepping outside yourself to check. Stop checking." Meryl did not fully understand what Frances meant until the 4th week, when something shifted the way it sometimes shifts. Suddenly, without announcement, the way a key turns in a lock that has been stiff for years. She went to Frances after that rehearsal and sat on the steps of the converted barn and talked for 2 hours. About what it felt like. About whether it would hold. Frances listened the way she always listened, fully, without the slight forward lean of a person waiting for their turn to speak. At the end of the conversation, Frances reached into her bag and took out a photograph. A young woman of 34 on a stage, mid-scene, completely inside the moment. The expression of a person who has found exactly the place they belong. She had carried it for 17 years. She held it out to Meryl. "I want you to have this," Frances said. "Not as an inspiration, just as proof. That it is possible to live there. That the place you found tonight is real, and you can go back." Meryl took the photograph. She put it in her coat pocket. She never returned it. She carried it through Yale Drama School, through the first off-Broadway productions, through the films that changed everything. It moved from apartment to apartment, folded inside the cover of whatever script she happened to be working on. When she was in doubt, which happened more than anyone who only saw the finished work would have guessed, she would take it out and look at Frances Dowd's face in 1949, completely in the place she belonged, and remember what it felt like to find that place for the first time. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Frances Dowd had died in 1987, quietly in Burnettsville, of complications following surgery. She was 72. She had kept running the junior program until 1983. Meryl had not been able to attend the service. She had been filming overseas, and the news arrived late, the way news does when it travels to find you somewhere very far from home. She had kept the photograph every day since. What no one outside Meryl's closest family knew, what Meryl herself had believed for 37 years, was that Frances Dowd had never seen what she had helped to create. She had died before most of the work, before Sophie's Choice, before the films that turned the quiet recognition Frances saw in a 16-year-old into something the whole world knew. Frances had a daughter named Helen. Helen Dowd was 63 years old, living in Connecticut, retired from a career in hospital administration. She had been sorting through her mother's things, in storage since 1989, when she found the box. Theater programs, letters, and at the bottom, a second photograph. Taken the same evening as the one Frances had given away, the same production, the same stage, but showing something else entirely. In this photograph, Frances Dowd was not alone on the stage. Seated in the front row, watching her, was a young woman, dark-haired. Still, the expression of a person who has found something they did not know they were looking for. On the back, in Frances's handwriting, "A student, once, the one I've been most proud of." There was no name. There was a date, June 1966. Helen spent 3 months trying to understand what the photograph meant, and another month deciding what to do. She wrote a letter to a management company she found after careful research, 2 paragraphs, plain and precise. She explained who her mother was. She explained the photograph. She explained what was written on the back. She said, "I think my mother knew. I want Meryl Streep to know that she knew." The response came in less than 24 hours. The arrangements were made in complete secrecy. The Tonight Show staff was told only that an envelope would be delivered to the desk at a designated moment during the interview. No explanation of what it contained. Helen was seated in the 6th row, center, her mother's photograph in her bag. Behind the scenes, Meryl had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. She had asked not to be told what was in the envelope before the taping. If it was what they were telling her, it might be. She wanted to see it without preparation. She wanted to feel like a person, not a moment. But this is the moment. No one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. The envelope contained 2 photographs. The first was the one Frances had taken in 1949, the one Meryl had carried for decades, the one currently folded inside the cover of her current script at home. The second was the one from the bottom of Helen's box, the one Frances had kept, the one with the handwriting on the back. Meryl had recognized the first photograph before she fully processed that she was looking at a copy. She had recognized the second before she could explain how. She had been 16 years old, sitting in the front row of a theater in Connecticut, watching a woman on a stage who was completely in the place she belonged. And she had understood, for the first time, what she herself wanted. She had not known Frances had seen her there. She had not known, for 37 years, that Frances had written on the back of the photograph what she saw. Jimmy had come from behind his desk. He stood at the edge of the stage, his hands pressed together, not speaking. A woman in the 6th row was standing, 63 years old, in a gray jacket, holding the edge of the seat in front of her. She had been trying to stay composed for the last 4 minutes. She was not entirely succeeding. Meryl looked at her across the studio. She stood up from her chair and walked to the edge of the stage and said, quietly, "Are you Helen?" The woman nodded. Jimmy Fallon looked at the audience. He said very softly, "Folks, I think we need to let this happen." Then he stepped back and said nothing else. Meryl came down from the stage into the house. She reached Helen in the 6th row and took both of her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "She kept it," Meryl said. "All that time. She kept it." "She kept everything," Helen said. Her voice was unsteady. The programs, the letters. She talked about that summer for the rest of her life. She said she only had one student who ever made her understand why she had done it. All of it. The years and the barn and all of it. Meryl pressed her hands tighter. "She never told me. She wasn't sure you remembered her." Meryl closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright in a way that had nothing to do with performance. "I carried her photograph for 58 years. Every single production. Every single day of doubt." Her voice caught. "I never stopped needing it." Helen reached into her jacket pocket and took out the second photograph, the one from the bottom of the box. She placed it in Meryl's hands. Meryl turned it over. She read the handwriting on the back. She read it again. She stood in the aisle with a photograph in her hands, and her eyes closed. And the silence in that room was the silence of 300 people witnessing something that belongs to two people, and understanding that they have been trusted with it anyway. Jimmy Fallon, at the edge of the stage, pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment. Questlove, standing behind his drum kit, did not move. The standing ovation began in the fourth row and moved outward through every seat in the house like a wave, every person rising before any single person decided to. 300 people simultaneously agreeing that what they had just watched was something they would carry for the rest of their lives. The director did not cut to commercial. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Helen Dowd returned to Connecticut that evening with one photograph. The other, the one with the young woman in the front row and the handwriting on the back, stayed with Meryl. It sits now on the desk in her home office, in a small frame, not in a cabinet, on the desk, where she works, where she reads scripts and makes notes and sometimes sits in the quiet of early morning thinking about what she is about to do. There is no record of Frances Dowd in any theater archive. She did not leave a body of work. She left a barn in New Jersey and 31 summers and the one student she was most proud of, who carried her face in a coat pocket for 58 years and never once put it down. Some people teach you how to perform. Frances Dowd taught one girl how to stop.